Japan, the land of the rising sun, a nation renowned for its technologically advanced cities, traditional cultural offerings, and immense natural wonders, which together make for one of the most sought-after tourist destinations in the world, attracting millions of visitors each year. Surprisingly, however, this level of openness to outsiders is a relatively recent phenomenon in the nation's history. In fact, for well over 200 years, from the 17th to 19th centuries, Japan's borders were firmly closed to any outside visitors whatsoever. This time period, known as Sakoku, bore witness to a flourishing of Japanese culture, rapid economic growth, and dynamic societal developments, which, up until that point, had never been seen before. As a result, this era gifted the nation with many of the iconic cultural treasures whose legacies have survived to this day. But how did this island nation undergo such a dramatic transition from a period of relative isolation into becoming one of the most developed and open countries in the world today? This is the history of Japan. The archipelago of islands that make up the modern nation of Japan have been inhabited for the better part of 40,000 years, with the first human settlers migrating there from mainland Asia. These early inhabitants brought skills such as agriculture and metalworking with them, laying the groundwork for the establishment of permanent settlements and eventually the earliest kingdoms. By the 3rd century AD, a significant portion of southern Japan had coalesced into a centralized power structure based around the Yamato region, ruled under a system headed by a monarch known as the emperor. Much of Japan's early history would be shaped and influenced by cultures from the Asian mainland, with Buddhism being introduced to the region in the year 552 from Korea. Later, in 645, a series of reforms known as the Taika reforms were implemented to remodel the political landscape of the country and mirror the Chinese system based around an imperial court. This court initially did not have a permanent home and was moved to a different location with each passing emperor until 794, when Emperor Kamu decided to fix the capital in one place, modern-day Kyoto. This decision initiated the beginning of the Heian period, which was to last for almost 400 years. Over time, however, the imperial court became grandiose and overly focused on internal politics, neglecting proper governance of the country outside of the capital and greatly weakening its own authority as a consequence. The land that had formerly been under the control of the emperor began to gradually slip into the hands of local noble elites. This led to the emergence of a feudal system where power was decentralized and no longer centered on the imperial court in Kyoto. The decline in the central authority of the state allowed powerful regional warrior clans, like the Taira and Minamoto, to grow in strength. Backed by the military might of their samurai warriors, these clans were ultimately able to challenge the dominance of the emperor. This came to a head during the Meiji Rebellion of 1160, sparked by disagreements over who should inherit the imperial throne. This conflict escalated into the Genpei War of 1182-1185, with the Minamoto clan, headed by its faction leader Minamoto no Yoritomo, eventually winning out over their rivals. Following this victory, they established a new and separate military government based in the city of Kamakura, far away from the imperial court of the emperor in Kyoto. Yoritomo was able to go further and convince Emperor Go-Shirakawa to grant him the title of shogun, or great general, in 1192, effectively making him the de facto ruler of all Japan and initiating a period of military rule called the shogunate. That was to last for the next 700 years. The Kamakura shogunate and Mongol invasions, although the emperor in Kyoto still held a ceremonial position and remained the symbolic leader of Japan. Real political and military authority now rested in the hands of the shogun in Kamakura. This new system created a clear separation between the imperial court and the warrior government, with the samurai class forming the backbone of political power. Under Minamoto no Yoritomo, the Kamakura shogunate established an administrative framework that strengthened the position of the warrior class and distributed land to loyal retainers. This feudal network ensured the shogunate's stability, at least for a time. However, Yoritomo's sudden death in 1199 created a power vacuum. The real control of the shogunate soon shifted into the hands of the Hodge clan, who acted as regents for the shogun. Regents were skilled administrators, but their rule was soon tested by one of the most formidable threats in Japanese history, the Mongol Empire. In the late 13th century, Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan and ruler of the Yuan dynasty in China, sought to expand his empire to include Japan. In 1274, the Mongols launched their first invasion. Backed by advanced military technology, including explosive projectiles and superior naval forces, the Mongols initially overwhelmed Japanese defenders on the island of Tsushima and parts of Kyushu. However, after several days of intense fighting, a sudden and powerful storm struck, destroying much of the Mongol fleet and forcing them to retreat. The Japanese would later call this storm kamikaze, or divine wind, believing it was sent by the gods to protect their land. The Mongols tried again in 1281, sending an even larger invasion force. This second assault saw fierce battles along the Japanese coasts, with samurai fighting valiantly to repel the invaders. Yet once again, nature intervened. Another devastating typhoon smashed into the Mongol fleet, sinking thousands of ships and ending the invasion. The repeated failures discouraged any further Mongol attempts to conquer Japan. Although these victories were celebrated, the Mongol invasions had strained the Kamakura shogunate's resources, maintaining coastal defenses, building fortifications, and mobilizing samurai forces required enormous funding. Yet there were no spoils of war to reward the warriors, since the Mongols had been driven off rather than conquered. This led to growing dissatisfaction among the samurai class. Over time, the shogunate's inability to meet the demands of its vassals weakened its authority. By the early 14th century, tensions between the imperial court and the shogunate began to rise again. Emperor Go-Daigo sought to overthrow the Kamakura regime and restore direct imperial rule. His efforts sparked the Genko War 1331 to 1333, which culminated in the shogunate's collapse when one of its key generals, Ashikaga Takauji, defected to the emperor's side. In 1333, the Kamakura shogunate fell, marking the end of Hage dominance. But Emperor Go-Daigo's restored rule would not last long. Ashikaga Takauji soon turned against him, seizing power for himself and establishing a new military government in Kyoto, the Ashikaga shogunate. The Ashikaga shogunate and the Age of Warring States. The Ashikaga shogunate, also known as the Muromachi period, 1336 to 1573, marked a very different chapter in Japan's history. Unlike the Kamakura shoguns, who ruled from a distant military headquarters, the Ashikaga shoguns established their base in Kyoto, close to the imperial court. This proximity gave the period a vibrant cultural life, but also left the shogunate vulnerable to court politics and factional struggles. Ashikaga Takauji, the first Ashikaga shogun, gained power by defeating Emperor Go-Daigo and installing a rival emperor in Kyoto. This began the Northern and Southern Courts period 1336 to 1392, during which two competing imperial lines claimed legitimacy. The Ashikaga supported the Northern Court, while loyalists to Go-Daigo maintained the Southern Court. For decades, Japan was split in two, with both sides fighting to assert authority. Eventually, the two courts were reunified under the Northern Line, but the shogunate's centralized control remained weak. One of the defining moments of the Ashikaga period came under the rule of Ashikaga Yoshimitsu R. 1368 to 1394. Yoshimitsu worked to stabilize the country, fostered diplomatic relations with Ming China, and oversaw an era of cultural flourishing. This period saw the rise of no theater, the perfection of the tea ceremony, the development of ink painting, and the creation of architectural masterpieces, such as Kinkakuji, the Golden Pavilion. However, the shogunate's power was always fragile, heavily dependent on alliances with powerful regional lords, the daimyo. As these daimyo grew wealthier and more militarily independent, their loyalty to the central government began to waver. The turning point came in 1467 with the outbreak of the WN War. The WN War began as a succession dispute within the Ashikaga shogunate, but quickly spiraled into a nationwide conflict. As rival daimyo took sides and used the chaos to expand their own territories, Kyoto itself became a battlefield devastated by years of fighting. Although the war technically ended in 1477, there was no true peace. The authority of the shogunate collapsed, and Japan entered a century-long era of constant civil war known as the Sengoku period, or Age of Warring States. During the Sengoku period, Japan was fragmented into dozens of independent domains, each controlled by a daimyo with his own army of samurai. Alliances shifted constantly, and battles for territory and power were relentless. This era produced some of Japan's most legendary warlords, including Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and Tokugawa Ieyasu, figures who would eventually reunify the country. While political unity was shattered, the Sengoku period was also a time of remarkable innovation. The introduction of firearms by Portuguese traders in 1543 revolutionized Japanese warfare, leading to new tactics and castle designs. Trade with Europe brought not only weapons, but also Christianity, which gained a foothold in some regions before later being suppressed. By the late 16th century, the stage was set for the rise of a new unifying power. Oda Nobunaga began the process of consolidating Japan through ruthless military campaigns, paving the way for Toyotomi Hideyoshi to complete much of the unification. After Hideyoshi's death, his rival and former ally Tokugawa Ieyasu would take the final step toward lasting peace. The Tokugawa shogunate and the Edo period in 1600, a decisive battle changed the course of Japanese history. At the Battle of Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu defeated rival warlords and emerged as the most powerful daimyo in Japan. 3 years later, in 1603, he was appointed shogun by the emperor, marking the beginning of the Tokugawa shogunate, also known as the Edo period. Ieyasu established his government in Edo, modern-day Tokyo, far from Kyoto and the imperial court. This distance allowed the Tokugawa to rule with firm military authority, while maintaining the emperor as a symbolic figurehead. The Tokugawa shoguns implemented strict policies to ensure stability, ending centuries of civil war. A central pillar of Tokugawa rule was the Senkin-Kotai system, which required daimyo to spend alternating years in Edo and in their home domains, leaving their families behind in the capital as hostages to guarantee loyalty. This system prevented rebellions and fostered a network of well-maintained roads and communication routes across Japan. The Tokugawa also enforced a rigid social hierarchy. At the top were the samurai, serving as administrators and enforcers. Below them were peasants, considered vital for producing food. Artisans came next, followed by merchants at the bottom, though merchants gradually became wealthy and influential despite their low official status. One of the most defining policies of the Tokugawa shogunate was sakoku, or closed country, implemented in the 1630s. Japan severely restricted foreign trade and prohibited Japanese citizens from traveling abroad. Only limited contact with the outside world was allowed, primarily through Dutch and Chinese traders at the port of Nagasaki. This isolation helped preserve stability, but also limited exposure to foreign technology and ideas. Despite these restrictions, the Edo period was a time of peace and cultural flourishing. Without constant warfare, arts and entertainment thrived. Kabuki theater, ukiyo-e woodblock prints, and haiku poetry became popular. Cities like Edo, Kyoto, and Osaka grew into bustling urban centers. The merchant class, though officially low in rank, became patrons of the arts and drove a consumer culture. The Tokugawa shogunate maintained peace for over 250 years, but by the 19th century, cracks began to appear. Economic strain, natural disasters, and corruption weakened the regime. Meanwhile, Western nations, expanding their influence in Asia, began pressuring Japan to open its ports. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States arrived with a fleet of black ships, demanding that Japan end its isolation. Faced with superior military technology, the Tokugawa had no choice but to sign treaties opening the country to trade. This humiliation, combined with growing internal unrest, set the stage for the shogunate's downfall. By the 1860s, anti-shogunate forces rallied around the emperor, calling for the restoration of imperial rule. In 1868, after a brief civil war known as the Boshin War, the Tokugawa shogunate collapsed. The emperor was restored to power in what became known as the Meiji Restoration, a turning point that would launch Japan into rapid modernization. The Meiji era to modern Japan, the Meiji Restoration of 1868 marked the end of feudal Japan and the beginning of a bold new chapter. Emperor Meiji and his advisors were determined to transform Japan into a strong modern nation that could stand equal to Western powers. To achieve this, they embarked on an ambitious program of modernization and industrialization. The new government abolished the samurai class and replaced it with a conscription army trained in Western military tactics. Feudal domains were replaced with prefectures under centralized control. Railroads, telegraph lines, and modern factories sprang up across the country. Western science, engineering, and education systems were rapidly adopted. Japan's leaders understood that in order to survive in a world dominated by imperial powers, the nation needed to become one itself. This drive led to rapid economic growth but also to military expansion. Victories in the First Sino-Japanese War 1894 to 1895 and the Russo-Japanese War 1904-1905 shocked the world, proving that Japan had emerged as a major military power. By the early 20th century, Japan controlled Taiwan, Korea, and parts of Manchuria. But this rise to power also set Japan on a collision course with Western nations. During World War II, Japan sought to dominate the Asia-Pacific region. However, after initial victories, the tide turned. Following devastating defeats in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, Japan surrendered, bringing the war to an end. In the aftermath, Japan was occupied by Allied forces led by the United States. A new constitution was introduced, renouncing war and establishing a democratic government. Over the following decades, Japan rebuilt its economy at an astonishing pace, becoming a global leader in technology, manufacturing, and culture. By the 1980s, Japan was an economic superpower. It's known for its innovation in electronics, automobiles, and industrial design. In the 21st century, despite facing challenges such as an aging population and natural disasters, Japan remains one of the most influential countries in the world, blending centuries-old traditions with cutting-edge modernity. From the rise of the samurai to the technological marvels of today, Japan's journey is a story of resilience, adaptation, and transformation. It's a reminder that a nation's history is not just about battles and politics, but about the spirit of its people. Thank you for watching this deep dive into Japan's epic history. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe to 4 more captivating journeys through the past and present of our world. And remember, history isn't just something we learn about, it's something we live every day.